Welcome to the Apocalypse Party Month edition of the Ecomodernist Soapbox. This month, we have a special reason to celebrate as the July 2018 projections of famed environmental expert Dr. Guy McPherson for a total environmental collapse that is calculated to have been taking place as of this October has been postponed. So we are sending out a special advisory to all of you out there to party this Halloween before the shit really hits the fan in November. We have a special guest with us today. He is Dr. David Zaruk, whose alter ego is the Risk Monger. When Dr. Zaruk's body is not possessed by the Risk Monger, he's a professor of communication at Odisee University College in Brussels. He has taken an active role on debates over many public issues, including vaccines, food risks, pesticides, and GMOs, and has served on many international expert panels related to this topic. Dr. Zaruk, how are you doing?
Not too good. It's a splitting headache. These transformations from the Risk Monger to professor are really kicking my ass. 2 days ago, the IPCC came out with their perhaps most frightening report to date. In fact, not too far away from McPherson's predictions. They're saying about 15 years and we're toast. The scientists should right away be challenging this. But instead, those who challenge the views are, basically argumentum ad hominem, being chased out in a rather undiplomatic and unscientific manner. We're getting to what I would call the so what moment. If the world is warming, okay, we've got that. The question whether it's warming or not warming and at what speed is not an issue we should be talking about. We should be talking about how we're going to deal with it. I'm not sure who it is that started to get this notion in our heads, but somehow we feel that man is going to be capable of stopping the heat of the sun and the warmings of the ocean. It'd be like Moses going into the ocean, putting his staff into it and saying, cool, or standing up to the sun and saying, stop. That's not going to happen. And I don't know who put the idea in the heads of the policymakers or the scientists to think that man is so majestic and so strong as to be able to achieve that.
You're talking about geoengineering, I guess, right?
Well, that stuff's interesting. And that stuff's interesting from the point of letting engineers play with things. It's more the simple sense of we can fight climate change by you buying our product. If we all do this, we'll all feel good. Well, I've referred to it as the environmental industrial complex. And the scientists don't quite realize that they're being sort of turned into the patsies in this game. As long as the scientists keep getting marched out and saying the things that the others want them to say, then you can continue to sell all of these wonderful goods. Now, that's not going to stop climate change. I think we should more concentrate on vulnerable populations, particularly in the developing world, that are getting hit much harder than we are. But we're too busy screaming and chasing some mythical scientists of the 2% who are disagreeing with them.
Talk a little about GMOs. Tell us a little about that.
It's another Armageddon or apocalyptic theory. Apparently, by eating GMOs, we have all these diseases coming in. And, well, there doesn't seem to be any evidence to prove it except for the fact that we think that the people who developed GMOs were lying. And so if they're lying, then that must be the case that these things are causing celiac disease or all these allergies or autism or cancer is another one. And so you can begin to see how this once again creates an interesting form of fear, terror, should I say, opportunity. And lo and behold, there are certain industries that will do very well, not just the groups that are selling the labels or running the campaigns. As you know, GMO stands for Greenpeace Membership Opportunity. But there's also the other groups in the organic food industry that see a very good marketing opportunity here as well.
The gigantic industry, very. Very, very lucrative industry, big, multi-billions of dollars, I feel.
Yep. But they're good people. They're nice people, as opposed to people who have developed the agricultural tools that have managed to feed the world and the growing populations over the last 5-6 decades. And as long as you're part of what I would call the naturopathic movement, if it's natural, it's good, they will support and agree with everything you say. And if you're supporting science and technology, you're some evil shill that's been paid off by some company that no longer exists now. I believe Bayer bought Monsanto, but everyone still has to use the Monsanto name because we have created this terrifying monster of a company that we can then use to make everybody afraid. And it being Halloween month, what's more fearful than some evil corporation trying to poison your children and willingly give them cancer and their Cheerios?
I think it's Smirnoff vodka is now GMO free. You can party with Smirnoff.
The GMO residues, which might be at the part per trillion range. Yeah, well, you have that as well. The traces that they're finding in wine. We have this character in France. His name is Gilles-Éric Seralini, who did the famous, look at my mouse, it's got a big tumor photos, if you remember those. He actually did a taste test where people could taste pesticides in wines. And somehow he was able to show the numbers that people were able to recognize different, bouquets of pesticides. But for some reason, they couldn't quite find the organic approved copper sulfate, which is extremely toxic in the organic wine. You've got a lot of hypocrisy going on here. The best example in Brussels is they've set up this committee called the Pest Committee. This is after the whole glyphosate terror show that went on for 3 years. This is kind of a dirty policy thing that people only in Brussels or Washington seem to be interested in. But essentially, it determines what you can and cannot do and what you can and cannot eat. So what happened was the head of the committee is a Frenchman, and he wants to have serious controls and to ban pesticides. But the organic industry uses a lot of pesticides as well. And these are toxins as well. You don't use something to deal with a pest that's not toxic. I mean, this is common sense. And the European Food Safety Authority determined that copper sulfate is extremely dangerous for the people using it, extremely dangerous for the environment, and it needs to be regulated and, in fact, banned. So the head of the pest committee that wants to ban all synthetic pesticides right away said, oh, no, we have to be flexible in this case. So you have to ban all synthetic pesticides that conventional agriculture uses, but the extremely toxic organic pesticides, well, the whole French organic wine industry would be destroyed if you did that. We can't have that. Put the economy first. You have this managed hypocrisy going through. And as long as you're pro-nature, and part of, as I call, the naturopathic cult, you can get away with complete contradictions.
Yeah, I hear you there. It's an age-old battle. It goes all the way back to the Dark Ages.
Oh, yeah. And you always have these sort of romantics versus the enlightened at every stage in history. And you would think we're getting more intelligent as we get more technologically advanced, but I think we're getting intellectually lazy. We don't actually have to think. And so you've got a lot of people who are not very intelligent, saying a lot of incredibly ridiculous things, but having their own cult followings that they then exploit and profit from. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my good doctor has been all over the world.
These are cults, and I shouldn't really speak of them in a way that's negative because we've had cults throughout history. But when a group of people can get together and close out any other ideas, and they're being led by a guru who is very quick at noticing an opportunity. Mercola seems to have all of these wonderful solutions for the fears he creates, and particularly selling supplements. Supplements are unregulated. You can say whatever you want about a supplement and people will buy it. So what keeps you awake at night, Gabe?
The climate.
Okay.
I think that motivates me a lot to do what I do. When it comes out of major organizations, it's got some gravitas. Though I got to wonder with the IPCC lately because they've been really ragging nuclear because of the waste. And they say that coal plants are their choice and they're going to suck in the carbon. which is kind of out to lunch.
It's mostly a volunteer organization, so this is already a warning. And the people who come in and are committed to these meetings are, in many cases, giving their time freely. So they have their own soapboxes that they bring with them. The challenge is when they do not open up very much to debates, and that's one of the real problems, I guess. So they should be working on the science, not getting into these political debates. Now, I understand the frustration when they feel responsible because they see numbers that terrify them, but they're also providing solutions which may not actually be a positive solution. One of the ones that I saw an interview on the BBC with one of the authors, and he said that we will have to cut back on red meat. In fact, we should just all be vegetarians. But he's created from all of his complex science a simplistic solution. And that's no longer doing science. And in fact, that's no longer doing what his remit is for. But the BBC, the medias love this type of approach because they can have a scientist like don the white coat and play the expert, giving advice that is really far out of what he is expected to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, the media, it becomes like a funhouse mirror.
You're not concerned about the overpopulation of the world, which, of course, Paul Ehrlich said in the 1960s with the population bomb. And then he came back to Berkeley, I think, just recently again to say we are heading over the cliff. I warned you guys.
My only concern with Dr. Ehrlich is that Guy McPherson is going to bust his record. As far as population goes, I think it's a problem, but not something we should lose sleep over.
What about 1 in 2 children being born with autism?
I never heard of that.
Stephanie Seneff, the famous researcher, has made this prediction many times. But it seems that each time she speaks, the numbers get more extreme. And so recently, I think she said by 2025, 1 out of 2 children will be born with autism. Cancer rates going through the roof. That doesn't keep you awake at night for your Armageddon Halloween. What about endocrine disruption? Apparently, the frogs were all supposed to disappear, and we were all supposed to be sterile by the 1990s, late 1990s. The endocrine disruption, so the hormonal imbalance due to our exposure to chemicals. That was in the 90s. The predictions in the 90s were that species would go extinct because they couldn't be reproducing because of all of the chemicals in the environment. The fertility rates are continually being measured and recalibrated to show that we're going sterile.
Well, that brings me to a question I was going to ask you, because we have a problem here. I don't trust industry, and I don't trust Greenpeace. Where do I find the truth? It seems like this is a very bad thing because they're acting like the boy who cried wolf, especially true with the climate. I think they painted themselves into a corner with all these crazy and bad predictions. Where did they get it right?
I'm a communications professor. So right away, when I look at an issue that's happening, I begin to look around at how people are communicating and interacting with each other. And whenever you have a major shift in the main communication tools that people use, you have a period of adaptation, which usually lags quite a long time behind. And that puts challenges on the main institutions of the day. Just to give you a good example, in the 1930s, you had a new communication tool called the cinema. Also radio as well, which allowed people to reach populations in much larger, more emotionally packed ways. So you had certain people like certain Walt Disney or certain Joseph Goebbels who figured out how to manipulate populations quite easily and quite severely. You have the printing press, telephone, television. You can see on each revolution major societal impacts. Well, the digitalization of knowledge and the ability to pack everything into our smartphone that we carry around with us all the time is probably the most significant communications revolution in the history of mankind. And it will affect not just our ability to go to a record store to buy records or, buy things online. It will affect the way we understand, the way we think, and the way we learn. And the main institution that is being challenged this time is science. Scientists have always been disagreeing and always been sorting things out, and it usually is a bit messy and sometimes can take 50 years, sometimes can take a couple hundred years before a decision. If you think of people like Newton or Copernicus, Galileo, there were always controversies surrounding them. But now, with everyone becoming an expert with a PhD from Google University and thinking that a few search terms is going to give them the answers that they need, we suddenly find that these debates are no longer being left to the scientists and becoming a citizen science vote over which concept or which theory is correct. And of course, the scientists themselves disagree, and that's making it more than just messy. It's creating a public panic around results of a study which may or may not be replicated. And it doesn't matter which field in science. So when somebody says, for example, that we've measured a decline in sperm samples, before other scientists can get their views on it, it's not only on TV, people are retweeting it and sharing it in the hundreds of millions. So nobody's reading the reports who's having a view on this anymore. I always find it funny when I have firewalled journal articles that I send to people. I know that they're only going to read the abstract, and I'm quite curious sometimes to see how they respond to these issues. People don't read. If I'll do a tweet, people will read what's in the tweet. They won't actually read the 3-page or 5-page blog behind it. I can give you a good story if you want, just to show you that.
But you became a full professor, though.
I'm still here. Cheated death far too many times to care anymore. So, anyway, to the end of the world.
Yes.
Clear, I need to elaborate on my last Edge of Extinction episode called This Is Probably It. So, what could possibly cause this is probably it? What could possibly cause this set of living arrangements to go away as early as this September or maybe even October? Because it might take a few weeks for the whole house to crumble, for the whole house of cards to fly away into the wind.